Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. Where did we get the significance of the first 100 days of a presidency from? Well, the term was coined in a July 24th, 1933 radio address by the U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And President Trump's first 100 days of his second term have come and gone. And I wanted to take a look at how they went and how it was covered. If you remember correctly, Trump's first term was covered in a particularly, well, let's say negative light. Spoiler alert, it's gotten worse this time. From a series of articles from the Daily Wire, according to data compiled by the Media Research Center, 92%, yeah, that's what I said, 92% of the major networks' media coverage throughout the first 100 days of President Donald Trump's second term has been negative. The MRC looked at coverage across the three major broadcast companies, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and set aside comments made by explicitly partisan guests, whether they were in support or opposition to the Trump administration. Instead, they only recorded, as they put it, evaluative comments that made by those whose role with the network suggests they are to behave in a nonpartisan fashion, like anchors, reporters, experts, things like that. Well, this is the same rubric by which MRC graded the bias of networks covering former President Joe Biden in 2021 and the networks covering Donald Trump during his first term in 2017. And based on the data, Trump's coverage has been even more negative during his second term than it was during his first. Quote, MRC analysis tallies 1,841 explicitly evaluative statements about President Trump and his Trump administration, of which 1,698, which is 92.2%, were negative, versus a mere 143 or 7.8%, which were positive. The report stated, noting that the data were pulled from some 899 stories about President Trump or his administration that aired during evening news broadcasts on ABC, NBC, and CBS between January 20th and April 9th. The biggest takeaway, according to the report, was the dramatic shift from the 59% positive coverage the same three networks offered former President Trump. That's dramatic. I mean, it really is, particularly when you think of what kind of president Biden was. I mean, when you have a 92% negative versus a 59% positive for Biden, that's dramatic. Trump fared better than a few associated with his administration, however. Elon Musk, believe it or not, and Doge saw 96% negative coverage. And the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, his coverage, 100% negative. So, at least they're consistent, right? They're nothing if not consistent on this. But here is a look back at some of the hoaxes, the misleading headlines, and fake news stories that have circulated since his inauguration on January 20th of this year. The Trump Rapid Response Team kicked off the administration's second week with a list of several hoaxes that had already taken root across multiple platforms and outlets. The first one involved regular Trump bashers like Senator Chris Murphy, he's a Democrat from Connecticut, and Representative Jasmine Crockett, a real piece of work. She's, of course, the one Democrat from Texas, who claimed, along with several media outlets, that President Trump was going to gut Medicaid and other assistance programs under the guise of cutting wasteful and fraudulent spending. That's what they said was going to happen. And according to the Office of Management and Budget, however, Trump's plan to cut waste, fraud, and abuse from government spending would not touch programs that provide, quote, direct benefits to Americans, unquote, such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and SNAP, among others. The second was a claim perpetuated by Chicago Public Schools and Governor J.B. Pritzker. He's a governor, Democratic governor from Illinois, who, of course, really, really wants to be president. That Immigration and Customs Enforcement, of course, ICE, right? ICE's agents had raided an elementary school. Even the Chicago Tribune ran a story on the alleged raid, as they put it, without first verifying the veracity of the claim. The so-called raid turned out to be a Secret Service investigation into a potential threat that had nothing to do with immigration at all. Well, the third was an attempt to undermine the still pending confirmation of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at that time, and alleged that a physicians advocacy group had come out in opposition to the nomination. The advocacy group turned out to be, an astroturfed organization backed by left-wing activists and a billionaire. You might recognize his name, Bill Gates. Yeah. By the time Kennedy's first hearing on Capitol Hill came around, media outlets were prepared. They even sent reporters to cover the hearing with their negative headlines pre-written before the questions started to fly. And Trump took a HuffPost reporter to task on Air Force One over claims that his administration would ignore Supreme Court rulings they did not like. Quote, "I don't know even what you're talking about. Neither do you. Who are you with?" That's what Trump said. The HuffPost, sir, it was of course the reply to his question, and of course Trump came back with the very hilarious, "No wonder, I thought they died." So anyway, Senator Amy Klobuchar, you remember her, right? She thought she wanted to be president too at one time. She claimed with no resistance from CNN anchor Dana Bash that the Trump administration was putting a stop to Head Start and terminating cancer research. Yeah, that's what Trump's doing. Trump took aim at ABC News during the swearing-in ceremony for Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, asking first, "Who do you work for?" ABC News. "No wonder," Trump shot back again. I have today the highest poll numbers I've ever had. They like the job I'm doing. We're finding billions and billions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, in late February, Reuters ran with a story claiming that Trump's foreign aid freeze had stopped the progress of a nationwide program that was intended to help stop the flow of fentanyl and other illegal drugs from crossing the southern border. Well, Trump's team said otherwise. Fake news. The State Department is actually trying to expand the initiative. Stop lying. CNN attempted to, as they put it, fact check. I love fact check. They attempted to fact check a claim from the Department of Government Efficiency, of course that's DOGE, that under former President Joe Biden, $8 million had been dumped into a study that attempted to make mice transgender. Trump's team responded with the receipts. Yes. Yeah, here's what they responded with. Just So we have everything straight here. Quote, the fake news losers at CNN tried to fact check President Trump, saying Biden spent $8 million on making mice transgender. But President Trump was right, as usual. Fact. Under the Biden administration, the National Institute of Health doled out millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded grants for institutions across the country to perform transgender experiments on mice. $455,000, quote, a mouse model to test the effects of gender affirming hormone therapy on HIV vaccine induced immune responses, unquote. $2,500,000, so $2.5 million, quote, reproductive consequences of steroid hormone administration. These mice manifest defects in ovarian architecture and have altered wow, and this is going to be a really good one. Folligogenesis? I don't know. Anyway, I don't speak medical, but obviously it had to do with the mice, right? $299,940, $60 short of $300,000, was, quote, for gender affirming testosterone therapy on breast cancer risk and treatment outcomes. We will compare the incidences of tumor-specific survival in female mice intact and Ufertomonize female mice receiving TT with their respective counterparts that do not receive TT, unquote. So again, it has to do with trans mice. So here's another one, $735,133 for microbiome medicated effects of gender affirming hormone therapy in mice. And $1,200,000 and androgen effects on the reproductive neoendocrine axis. Aim to utilities transgenic mice to test whether male level androgens act via AR, specifically in kisspeptin neurons, are necessary and or specific for androgen inhibiting of in vitro LH pulse parameters, including pulse frequency and the estrogen-induced LH surge. Now, again, you may speak medical, I don't, but again, obviously, this is having to do with transgender mice. And we're not even done. Here's the last one, $3,100,000 for conjugal hormones as mediators of sex and gender influences in asthma. We will study the contributions of estrogens to HDM-induced asthma outcomes using male and female mice treated with estradiol. So again, if you add up all of those dollars, it adds up to over $8 million. $8,290,053. Well, that was the receipts, okay? That's what was put out there. And guess what? CNN was forced to update the story. They were forced to say we lied. After multiple outlets published stories on a knockdown, drag-out fight between Elon Musk and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Trump shut down an NBC reporter who asked about it, saying, quote, no clash, I was there. You're just a troublemaker, is what Trump said. Well, Bloomberg ran a story on Musk claiming that he planned to target programs like Social Security and Medicare for massive spending cuts. And the Trump administration pushed back, noting that Musk was specifically seeking out fraud, waste, and abuse within those programs, just as he was across other areas of the federal government. And then all hell broke loose over a Signal chat where key members of the administration discussed regulatory attacks on Houthi terrorists. A chat in which Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic was inadvertently included, and really, in my opinion, should have identified himself and let them know that he was there and who he was. Didn't do that. Didn't do the responsible thing, and Trump was pressured by Democrats and media to fire Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth or National Secretary Advisor Mike Walls, from which phone Goldberg was added. But he shot that idea down, of course, and said, "I don't fire people over fake news and witch hunts." So good for him. An internal investigation revealed that an iPhone algorithm was likely the reason that Goldberg was accidentally added to the chat, and all parties involved stated that while the attacks were discussed in some detail, no sensitive or classified information was disclosed. And Democrats and media outlets then took up the cause of deported Salvadoran citizen and MS-13 member Kilmar Garcia, often referring to him simply as the Maryland Man, right? Border czar Tom Holman set the record straight on that case, though. And then reports of a second Signal chat group, which allegedly included Hegseth's wife, brother, and attorney, began to circulate, despite the fact that none of the reports included any evidence that Hegseth had discussed sensitive information in that chat group, which he accessed through his private phone. NPR still ran a story claiming that it was all too much, and Trump was actively looking for someone to replace Hegseth. Well, the White House nixed that report in short order, saying, "Wrong, fake news." And following his highly publicized Easter weekend visit to Rome, Vice President J.D. Vance was attacked for breaking the rules and taking a photo in the Sistine Chapel, even though the Daily Beast included the fact that he had permission to do so in an article about him. The outlet still ran with a headline that read, "J.D. Vance ripped for embarrassing gaffe during Vatican visit." Yeah, and of course, a lot of people just read the headlines, right? And so they would think that this was on JD. Quote, "These fake news losers buried this in the 14th paragraph," unquote. That's what Trump's team shot back, referring to the outlet's admission that he'd been permitted to take the photo. Rubio addressed the latest misleading story during a Sunday appearance on NBC's Meet the Press, where host Kristen Welker claimed, as did her counterparts on the other networks, that the Trump administration had deported 3 minor children, aged 2, 4, and 7, who were American citizens. Quote, 3 U.S. citizens aged 4, 7, and 2 were not deported. Their mothers who were illegally in this country were deported. The children went with their mothers, said Rubio. So yeah, there's a little more context to the story, right? But it sounds good, if you just leave out context. Well, that was how Trump's first 100 days was covered. And so I wanted to also take a look a little bit at some of the things that happened during that first 100 days. BBC News actually ran a story, and BBC, again, very partisan, very biased on the liberal end of things. But I really thought that it did a pretty good job of putting things together. So let's go through that a little bit, because here are 6 turning points from the first 100 days. Because obviously Trump has done a lot in his first 100 days, and I will say, he, even though he's done a lot, I haven't supported every single thing that he's done. Okay, I did vote for him. You know that. I do support him. I do think he's doing a lot of really good things, but I don't support everything that he's done in the first 100 days. But let's get into it. Like day 20, presidential power. For once, it wasn't a Trump social media post that sparked an outcry. This is, again, according to BBC. 3 weeks into the new term, at 10:13 a.m. on a Sunday morning, Vice President J.D. Vance wrote 9 words that signaled a strategy which has since shaped the Trump administration's second term. Quote, judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power. That's what he wrote. He declared that on X. And in the media frenzy that followed, legal experts lined up to challenge that assertion, pointing to a 220-year-old principle which lies at the heart of the American democracy, as they put it. Courts have the power to check and strike down any government action, laws, regulations, executive orders that they think violates the U.S. Constitution. So let me stop here. Judges and courts have jurisdictions. Okay, these judges were way out of their lane. A traffic judge can't just overturn a presidential executive order, right? That is for the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, to rule on. So let's continue. He says that the courts have been more resistant, with well over 100 rulings so far, halting presidential actions they deem to be unconstitutional, according to a tally by the New York Times. Some of the biggest clashes have been over Trump's immigration crackdown. In March, more than 200 Venezuelans deemed a danger to the U.S. were deported to El Salvador, many under sweeping wartime powers and without the usual process of evidence being presented in court. And let me stop here just for a second. I do believe that this may be overturned, some of this, just because of the due process thing. The Trump administration is leaning on something that hasn't really been used before, and maybe the courts say okay, but there's not a lot of precedent for it. So we'll see how that goes. Trump and White House officials have said that they will obey court rulings, even as the president lambasts many of the judges who issue them, and the administration at times moves slowly to fully comply. But it all amounts to a unique test of the constitutional system that for centuries has operated under a certain amount of good faith. Well, yes. Yes, that's true. The U.S. Supreme Court will have to rule on this soon, though. They will have to see, does any judge anywhere, if you just have judge on the front of your name, can they overturn anything that a president does? I think the Supreme Court is going to definitely have to rule on that soon. Well, day 32 was about government cuts. Elon Musk, dressed in black from head to toe and wearing sunglasses, stood center stage and basked in the adulation of the Conservative Political Action Conference crowd. The richest man in the world, they write, who wants to cut trillions of dollars from the federal government, said he had a special surprise. Argentinian President Javier Milei, known for his own budget slashing, emerged from backstage and handed him a shiny gold chainsaw. Quote, "This is the chainsaw for bureaucracy," Musk exclaimed. Chainsaw! It was a dramatic illustration not only of Musk's enthusiasm for Doge and Doge's assignment, but also of the near rock star status of the South African born technologist has developed among the Trump faithful. I love how they always have to put in there, well, he's not from this country. Since that appearance, Musk has dispatched his operatives across federal government, pushing access sensitive government databases and identifying programs to slash. Sounds ominous, doesn't it? Although he has not come anywhere near to finding the trillions of dollars of waste he once promised, they say, his cuts have drastically reduced dozens of agencies and departments, essentially shutting down the U.S. The U.S. Agency for International Development, that's the USAID, of course, and attempting to dismantle the Department of Education. Well, it's not just Doge that's going to do that. I mean, Trump has said that's what's going to happen. Day 72, though, was on the economy. The S&P 500 index of the largest firms listed in the U.S. was hit particularly hard by the Liberation Day tariffs. And even though the White House has reversed course on some of the highest tariffs, it hasn't fully recovered since. It's gotten pretty close, to be honest with you, in recent days. But anyway, the economy was the biggest concern for the U.S. voters in November's election, and Trump rode a tide of deep unhappiness over Biden's handling of inflation all the way to victory. His pledge to cut prices, pare back government regulation, and boost homegrown industry was a pro-business message warmly welcomed on Wall Street and by many working Americans. But as they put it, as Trump tries to follow through on his promise of new tariffs, the economic costs, at least in the short term, have become painfully apparent. The stock market is sinking. Interest rates, including for home mortgages, are rising, and consumer confidence is down. Unemployment is also ticking up, in part due to the growing number of federal employees forced out of their jobs. Like I say, the stock market, if you're using that for a beacon of any kind, I mean, the stock market was very much overvalued going into this, and the tariffs were the spark for a correction. The Federal Reserve Bank, along with economic experts, warned Trump's plan will shrink economic growth and possibly lead to a recession. We'll see, how that all takes place. I mean, there definitely are signs that the tariff war, particularly with China, is not going real well, and that there definitely needs to be some sort of resolution here soon, because the economy is definitely slowing down. And my take on this is that I'm just a little concerned that well, I mean, first of all, yes, we did need to address the China problem, but by doing it right now, what's happening is it's kind of taking steam out of the other things that we're doing so well. I guess is how to put it. So we'll see how it comes out. But while they say here, BBC, while the president's approval ratings on his handling of the economy have tumbled, many of his supporters are sticking with him. And in former industrial areas hollowed out by the loss of manufacturing jobs, there are hopes that tariffs could even the global playing field. Economic concerns have contributed to Trump's overall decline in the polls, but in one key area, he is still largely on solid ground in the public's eyes, and that is immigration. So let's talk about that. Day 58, immigration. The Trump administration says they are members of the Tre de Agua gang. It's a powerful multinational crime organization. A tough stance on immigration was a central plank of Trump's re-election campaign, and the president has used his broad powers of enforcement to deliver that pledge. Well, illegal border crossings were falling at the end of Biden's presidency because it looked like obviously Trump was going to get elected, but are now at the lowest monthly total for more than 4 years. A majority of the U.S. public still backs the crackdown, of course, but it has had a chilling effect on communities of foreign students who have found themselves caught up in the blitz. And again, I would say you're either here illegally or you're not. So if there's a chilling effect because you're here illegally, well, that's a good thing. If you're here legally, then you have nothing to worry about, right? Well, they say some, including permanent residents, have been detained and face deportation because of their role in pro-Palestinian Palestinian campus protests. Civil rights lawyers warn that some migrants are being deported without due process, sweeping up in the incident among the killers and thugs that Trump says are being targeted. Well, again, I mean, if you're here illegally, there is no due process because you're not a citizen with U.S. constitutional rights. I mean, if you're a citizen, then you have constitutional rights here. If you're not, then you don't have those rights. You're here illegally. You're a criminal. You're illegal alien, which, yes, is a legal term. They say while so far there haven't been the level of mass deportations that some hoped for and others feared, newly empowered immigration enforcement agents have taken action across the U.S. in businesses, homes, and churches. They have been active in universities too, which have become a prominent target for President Trump in several other ways. And that, they say, is day 91, war on institutions. And I find this really interesting. They go into a whole thing. We're not going to go into it ourselves here, but basically they go into a whole thing of how, he's taken target at universities around the U.S. And yes, there's a lot, billions of dollars that are going to these high-end universities, and they're doing nothing with it. I mean, this is definitely a fraudulent system. But the fact that the left is saying, well, we need to be giving billions to these universities that have billions in endowments and things like that. It's silly. But they also said the diversity projects are another thing that Trump is known for in his first 100 days. He said the press conference at the White House began with a moment's silence for the victims of an aircraft collision over the Potomac River, and then within seconds of the pause coming to an end, Trump was on the attack. A diversity and inclusion initiative at the Federal Aviation Agency was partly to blame for the tragedy, which, by the way, we have some recent information on who was at fault for that, and that was the female pilot of the Army helicopter. But anyway, it was a startling moment that was emblematic of the attack his presidency has launched against inclusive programs that have proliferated in recent years across the U.S. government and corporate world. So again, he goes into a whole thing here of how how bad this attack on DEI programs is. And I would just add, DEI is just plain racism. And so I love seeing the fact that he is taking this out of the federal government. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on the first 100 days. I think he's done some really good things, a few things I wouldn't have, and I have some concerns about. But I would love to hear from you. Of course, you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. We're on YouTube, so please click like, share, subscribe, and thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.